Hello guys, I'm Lucy and I'm one of the interns here. And I am reading the teaching text for today, which is Luke 5, 1 to 11. So if you want to turn to it, you can. Otherwise, I think it'll be on the screen. One day, as Jesus was standing by the lake of Gennesaret, the people were crowding around him and listened to the words of God. He saw at the water's edge 2 boats left there by their fishermen who were washing their nets. He got into one of the boats belonging to Simon and asked him to put him out a little from the shore. And then he sat down and taught the people from the boat. When Jesus was finished speaking, he said to Simon, "Put it into deep water and let the nets out for a catch." Simon answered, "Master, we've worked all day and night and haven't caught anything. Because you say, I'll let down the nets." When they had done so, they caught such a large number of fish in their nets that their nets started to break. So they signaled to their partners in the other boats to come and help them. And they came and filled both boats full so that they began to sink. When Simon and Peter saw this, he fell at Jesus' knees and said, "Go away from me, Lord, I am a sinful man." For he and all the other companions were astonished at the catch that they had taken. So James and John and the sons of Zebedee, Simon's partner, then Jesus said to Simon, "Do not be afraid now, you'll be fishers of people." So they pulled their boats up on the shore and left everything to follow him. This is the word of God.
God. Church, thank you so much for being with us today. In case you can't tell, maybe you don't know, this is not my normal voice. I'm going to ask you to bear with me, and we're going to pray that God moves despite any of my weaknesses or limitations today. Can I get an amen? I want to start by asking you today, church, do you know your why? Could you articulate the reason it is that you do what you do? Could you put into words what it is that is at the center of why you do the things that you do? Simon Sinek, in his excellent TED Talk and okay-ish book, defines your why as a deep-seated purpose, cause, or belief that is the source of your passion and inspiration. And I ask you again, do you know your why? And I'd be willing to argue that if I asked each and every one of you in this room over a coffee, that you may struggle to give a very succinct answer to that question. And I wonder why that is. Because if we don't know why we do the things that we do, what is fueling the things that we do? Are we just acting on impulse? Is it for survival? Or is it the absolute dreaded expression, I don't know, it's just what I've always done? Knowing our why helps us to not only put a name to what we are passionate about and what inspires us, but also to ensure that our values and the things that we hold dear in turn align with those actions. And we accept, it's funny that we don't, I'm saying this from a point of me, by the way. I think until I really started looking at this and thinking about it, I'm not sure that I could have given you like my one sentence why. But if you look around, businesses, organizations, churches, charities, we accept that they should have a one sentence why. Most businesses would point you to their mission statement. Coca-Cola, to refresh the world and make a difference. Sounds delightful. Sounds ideological even. And then you remember that Coca-Cola exists for one real purpose. Their why is profit. Their why is money. That's okay. They're a business. On some level, that kind of has to be the core of their why, no matter how much they try and dress it up. So we can accept that whilst a mission or a purpose is vitally important, It's the values and actions that sit behind that mission and that purpose that will actually be the only way you can reveal a full story. Those values, those actions become the how behind the why. And if done well, our values should dictate our actions and align to live out our mission, or our why, if you will. Now, here at Encounter Church, as we start our core series where we want to talk about our core values, I've been blessed to get to talk to you about our mission as a church. And ours is actually a really simple one. Encounter Church exists to help every person have an encounter with Jesus. Can I get an amen? And over the coming weeks, as we start this series and unpack it, we're going to talk to you about the ways in which we seek to make sure that our actions and our core values align with that mission and with that overall vision. Why we want to multiply resilient disciples. Why we contend in prayer. Why we're a Bible-fed and Spirit-led church, why we want to be Monday inviters, and why we want our hearts on fire for Jesus. Why do we name these things and own these things and proclaim these things? Because I'll be honest with you, church, we want you to hold us accountable to them. We have a mission. These are our values that align with that mission, and our actions should represent that. But today we'll unpack a little bit of the why behind the why. Why is our entire reason for existing as a church to help people have an encounter with Jesus. And the reason is because, as today's scripture will show us, is that all it takes is one encounter with Jesus to change absolutely everything. Today's teaching finds us in the morning with Jesus on a beach, and he's trying to teach, but the crowd is growing and the masses are coming in and they're pushing in, and it's pretty hard. And unless you're me right now and I really need you to, it's really hard to project to a room full of people or a beach covered in people when they're this far away from you, right? The crowd's gotten large. He can barely see, he can barely be heard. So Jesus sees two empty boats on the water's edge, and he walks over to one. And again, we're told here, by the way, that the fishermen at this point in time, let me just give you some context as we go. The fishermen are washing their nets. It's the morning. The fishermen are washing their nets. This means that the fishermen, by the way, are done for the day. They're packing up shop. They're not getting started. They're getting finished. They're done. Jesus steps into one of the boats, calls out to Simon and says, push this empty boat out into the water. Now, despite having just finished a full night of work and trying to wrap up for the day, he obeys. And Jesus teaches from the boat. And when he's finished teaching, when he's finished giving his message, he says to Simon, go out where the water is deeper and let down your nets to catch some fish. Simon, bless him, he must be thinking, I did the push the boat out thing. I'm okay with that, but I literally just clean those. You ever finished cooking in dishes and then you walk past and somebody's put a cup in the sink? Makes me more furious than a kitchen full of dishes. There must be a part of Simon that's like, Jesus, you put the cup in the sink, bro. I'm done. But even if he's thinking that, what I love is that Simon doesn't say it. Not to begin with, what he starts with is master. He starts by just kind of affirming that Jesus is in a position of power, that Jesus is in a position of authority. Him and his men, by the way, they were finishing, they were doing their nets. They could have left. The rest of the guys that were with him could have left, but they didn't. They stayed to hear Jesus teach. So they're accepting some kind of authority in Jesus. But Simon does push back just a touch. He says, hey, we worked hard all night. We didn't catch a thing. I want you to remember here, in this very instance, Simon's the expert. He's a fisherman. Jesus may be a wise teacher. He may have authority, but he's not a fisherman. Simon must be thinking Jesus, you fish at nighttime when it's quiet, not when there's a beach covered in people and they're making noise for the fish. I know what I'm doing. And then he finishes up that thought with this one, but if you say so. So he may have knowledge. He may consider himself the expert, and by all means he probably should. But in this moment, Simon chooses obedience. On the previous night, expert or not, let me remind you what happened the previous night. He didn't catch anything. He may be the expert. He may be the guy with all the knowledge in the world. He didn't catch anything. He had failed. So now he's going to try again. But he's going to try again under Jesus' instruction, under Jesus' watch. Because Simon doesn't know this, but Jesus is about to make it really clear that when he calls you, you get renewed conviction. You get a renewed action. And you might even get a different response. And this time, they let down the nets and they become so full that they begin to tear. They become so full that Simon needs to call out to the others from the other boats and people from the beach to come and help him. You see, Simon thought he knew what was he wasn't pre-prepared for what was happening. Why? Because Simon thought he knew what happened from here. He thought he knew, when I let down these nets into the water, I'm coming up empty again. So now he's scrambling, he's calling out to people like, come and help. And what I love is that even in this moment, Jesus is kind of reaffirming like, hey man, you're going to need other people in this. Jesus is creating a scenario where if Simon were to try and finish this all up on his own, he's going to fail again. There is going to be a problem. Jesus is creating a space in which not only are Simon's expectations destroyed, but a need for others is created. Something incredible is happening. And it's too big for one man. The nets are starting to tear. The boats are starting to sink. This is an almighty catch. But you'll note, the nets don't tear. The boats don't sink. Why? Again, they toiled all night before. They'd attempted to catch fish and failed. But now under Jesus' instruction, under his watch, under his command, the catch is there. It's secure and it's greater than they could have possibly imagined. And what I love is that Simon's response to this isn't what I think mine would have been. I think I'd have been celebrating. I failed again. This is not like a market economy where they're like, don't worry, if we have a really big night's catch the night before, we'll chuck those in the freezer and we'll pull them out when we have a bad day. Like, this is a real hand-to-mouth economy we're talking about over here. He's just hauled in such a catch that nobody's ever seen anything like it. And does he celebrate? Does he jump for joy? Does he start dancing on the boat? Does he try to take credit? No. He doesn't do any of those things. He falls to his knees. And he says, Lord, please leave me. I am a sinful man. And in this moment, that is not a prayer of confession, I don't think. But it is a recognition of ingrained sinfulness that Simon recognizes in himself. And I always try and make sure I'm pointing these things out as I go. Do you know what Jesus doesn't do here? He doesn't correct him. He doesn't do, no, man, it's okay. No, just stand up. In that moment, Jesus, by allowing him to do that, is allowing Simon this moment of recognition. Is allowing Simon this moment of like, man, the penny's dropped. I have all this inside of me and something now has to change. But Jesus does take this moment of Simon's deep understanding and acceptance and he uses it But he doesn't use it to go, yeah, you're right, and create a barrier. He uses it to draw Simon in. In this moment of personal encounter, I've seen just how powerful the fruits of an encounter with Jesus can be, of realizing that despite his flaws, Jesus has drawn him in closer, used him to do something beyond his belief. It's in that moment that it hits Simon. That an invitation to follow Jesus and obey his commands had borne immediate results. He gave Jesus some authority and netted a catch. I've tried to work out exactly how much this was. The ranges vary. Anywhere from 12 to 30 years' wages were in this catch. There was no way to account for how big this catch was. This is what's happening when he just responded to Jesus and gave him a little bit of authority. There's absolutely no doubt that wasn't part of Simon's brain going, what happens if I give him everything? What happens if I hand everything over to Jesus? Keeping in mind, he wasn't celebrating the fortunes of the catch. And Jesus replies to this moment of confession from Simon, this moment of deep kind of recognition from Simon. Don't be afraid. From now on, you'll be fishing for people. And I want to remind you again, because I think we have this thing in the church where we are constantly wanting to point out, and by the way, Jesus will meet you wherever you are, but we have this thing of we really lionize, like this person was in the depths of despair and they were pulled out by Jesus, and that is a beautiful, beautiful testament to God's goodness. But that's not what happened here. This man's been presented with unworldly fortune. This man has literally just come off the biggest win of his entire life. Decades worth of wages. Moments before, Simon had declared himself too sinful to be in the presence of Jesus. And still Jesus is calling to him. Still Jesus is calling Simon to his mission and to a new path. But he starts by saying, hey, despite all this, despite what you think you know, don't be afraid. And as soon as they landed, they left everything and followed Jesus. Now these fishermen, their why up until now had probably been a pretty simple one. I catch fish. That's what I do. That's what I've been put on this earth to do. That's how I support my family. That's how I support myself. Let me be really clear. That is admirable. That is an admirable profession. That is an admirable cause. But after a personal encounter with Jesus, they immediately turn their backs on their old why for a new one. Henry Ford was the creator of the first kind of mass-produced, affordable automobile. His big thing was like, he wanted to create an automobile that his own workers could afford to buy. That was kind of how he started. And this quote of his he has that I love, that is, if I had asked people what they wanted, they would have told me they wanted a faster horse. Prior to this event, prior to this encounter with Jesus, if you had asked Simon, what is it that you want? I bet you he'd have said a really big catch of fish. I'd put my money on that. The money that Simon left on the beach to rot. When he is presented with just that thing, he says, I don't want it anymore. He turns his back on it. He's done. Why? Because he's found something better to pursue. He's found something more meaningful to point himself towards. And I'm telling you, man, I make this mistake all the time. I can't help myself. I recognize it as I was writing this sermon. I just want to be honest with you. I recognize how often in my life I am asking God for more fish. How often in my life I'm saying, Jesus, I need you to help me with this thing right now. forgetting that he's got something in mind for me that I don't understand and I can't see. But my job is to make sure my eyes are open to it so that when he presents it to me, I can say, I don't want what I used to think I wanted. I want what you want for me. This is the reason for Encounters. Why? Because it doesn't matter what we think we know. Jesus is calling us to something better. Jesus has the power and the desire to take the things we thought we knew and the people we thought we were and to use us in ways we couldn't possibly imagine. Yes, you. Encounter's mission to help every person have an encounter with Jesus is a direct response to Jesus' command to become fishers of people. His call to ensure that the good news was known, heard, and felt by everyone. And again, yes, you. And some of you might be thinking, I've tried. I've had my moment. I had a bit of a dalliance with faith when I was a kid and it didn't really work out. Or I did have a time when I believed and now I don't. Jesus, I accept him as a guy, but I'm not sure about the rest of it. The memories faded. Nothing changed like I thought it would. I want to remind you, maybe you didn't know this. Maybe this is new information. Before this passage, Simon had interacted with Jesus before. He had been present before in a synagogue when Jesus was teaching. Jesus had actually healed Simon's mother-in-law of illness. Jesus wasn't unfamiliar to Simon at all and vice versa. But in the same respect, Simon had also fished before. But not like this. Our mission to give people, every person, the opportunity to have an encounter with Jesus is about creating opportunity after opportunity after opportunity so that people can see a familiar thing in a completely new way. And all of it under the call from Jesus that starts with this: don't be afraid. There's a very famous, I guess very famous is like arguable. I don't know anymore what's famous or if it's just my algorithm, right? There's a comedian and podcaster by the name of Theo Von. For people who know who this is, they're probably a bit nervous about where I'm going right now. Literally, in the last 24 hours, my feed has been absolutely crammed full of the back end of his most recent podcast, where he's talking about re-engaging with his faith. This guy is, by the way, one of the most downloaded and listened to podcasters in the world. He is doing just fine. He's also this interesting guy who has a funny way of really like asking these beautifully simple, deep questions on his place. Anyway, amazing stuff. And he's talking about re-engaging with his faith. He's talking about re-engaging with Jesus after years of dormancy, after years of recognizing that he's probably not been taking it all that seriously. I'm gonna paraphrase some of this, mostly for language and partially because he's a little bit rambling. But he starts by saying, hey man, I've had a good story and it served me well. But I don't want that story anymore. I want something different. And then he kind of has this like 1,000-yard stare as he tries to gather his next thought. And again, I'm paraphrasing some of this. And because I'm talking about it, you're all going to get this clip on your phone later anyway, so you'll get to see the whole thing. And he says, I'm so used to knowing how to operate in that space. And he's referencing the space of the old hymn. I'm so used to knowing how to operate in that space that I think I'm kind of a little bit afraid to leave it behind me. I know how to navigate getting this messed up vehicle down the street. But I think I want a new story. And that's the one thing I'm asking God for. He may not know it yet, but my goodness, has Theo Von had an encounter with Jesus. That kind of thinking doesn't, you can read any theology or self-help book in the world you want. You don't come to that conclusion without an encounter with Jesus. I'm sorry. And it sounds like to me, Theo Von's ready to change his why. I bet if you'd asked him 10 years ago, he probably wanted the biggest podcast in the world, or he wanted to be touring, doing stand-up, or all of those things. And it sounds to me like he's ready to change the why. He's ready for a new story. And much like there would have been with Simon, much like there is for Theo Von, much like there is for you and for me, there is fear in leaving the old you behind. The version of you that you know how to navigate. The version of you that you, despite the fact it might be a little bit broken, you've learned how to understand it. I had this old phone, an old phone charger, and it would only charge if I just put it into the phone and then wedged something else underneath it. Did it work? Sure. Did I feel like my life had changed when I spent $12 on Amazon for a new charger? I persevered with this for months, people. It is understandable if we're not willing to invest $12 in the new phone charger. Why the idea of turning our back on things that we have learned to hold dear even when we know they're not good for us for a better story seems hard or scary. And I think that's the reason that Jesus starts his invitation to Simon with, do not be afraid. Jesus met Simon where he was at, on his level, on his beach, in his boat, where he fishes. He took a situation that Simon thought was finished in failure and reversed it. And in response to Simon's obedience, brought about abundance beyond his wildest dreams. He took a self-proclaimed sinner, removed his fear, declared that he will use him to do amazing things. He changed his why from one of self-service to one of a greater good. One encounter with Jesus, not his first encounter with Jesus. Hear me in that. This might happen on your first one, but it doesn't always. After an encounter with Jesus, everything that Simon had believed to be true, known, and final was proven to be false, uncertain, and a book that was far from being written. But in order for that to be true and take hold, Simon had to be willing to sacrifice the man that he used to be, the path that he used to walk, the role that he used to have for himself, but in exchange for a better one. Life-changing encounters like that are why Encounter's mission is to facilitate as many opportunities for them to happen as possible. Band, you can come back up, please. Because through his sacrifice on the cross, through his execution and resurrection, Jesus assures us that an encounter with him is available to us from here until kingdom come, but also brings with it a set of promises. A promise that our sin does not separate us from Jesus. A promise that our perceived truths about ourselves are replaced with Jesus' truths about us. That nothing is final, not even death. And that endings to our stories, to my story, to your story, are far from being written. All it takes is one encounter with Jesus. All it takes is that first choice of obedience, that first response. And your life and your why can be changed forever. Over the coming weeks, we are going to go through our values one by one. If you want to know who Encounter Church is, if you're a guest and this is the first time you've been with us, welcome. Over the next 5 weeks, we're going to unpack each of our 5 core values. We're going to give some practical advice around each one. That's how we tend to work in these parts. But for this week, I just want to invite I'm going to try that with not that accent. I would like to invite you to join our mission. I want to invite you to join in Jesus' mission. I'm going to start by not being afraid. I'm going to reverse a little bit here. We've talked enough about that. But I want us to do so by following the same command that Jesus made of Simon before that. Church, if you want to join us in your mission, I'm going to ask you to let down your nets. Think of an area in your life where Jesus may be calling you to try again. One in which you've assumed you know better. One in which you've tried again and failed. I want to ask you to not be afraid to try again. I want you for one more time to trust in Jesus. To trust in a fresh encounter with Jesus. To know that you can follow his call. To not be afraid. And that you can trust him with your why. Because what if, much like Simon, he's calling you into obedience in order to facilitate a new catch? What if Simon had assumed that his knowledge and his background and his expertise and his why that already existed mattered more than Jesus' why? And again, for those of us who are a little uncomfortable with big change, I'm going to remind you, Jesus didn't actually start by asking Simon to step out of his comfort zone. Remember, he came to him, his beach, his boat. He wasn't asking him to do something he didn't know how to do. He wasn't trying to teach him a new skill even. All Jesus was doing was asking him to try again. But this time in response to Jesus' why, not his. Simon didn't know what the end results would be. But Jesus did. And the results of his obedience after an encounter with Jesus changed his life forever. For so many of us, we cling on to the role of the story that we've always had. Fisherman, salesman, admin worker, father, daughter, failure, coward, sinner. How would your life change if you allowed yourself just one more time to cast off your old label and your old self for the version of you that Jesus is calling you into? If, like Simon, you didn't stop it, but Jesus, I've tried that already. If, like Simon, you took your doubts and your fears and responded with, but if you say so, I'll try again. And in doing so, whether we can see it in that moment or not, we're taking the first step to recenter our why around Jesus. Church, would you pray with me? Maybe if you want to repeat this after me in your head, say it out loud if you're feeling particularly brave. Father, call me to let down my net. Make me a fisher of men. May I be willing to leave my old self behind in order to follow you. I will not be afraid. For I move in your power. and I move for your glory.